Our scripture lesson this morning comes from the Old Testament book of Malachi, 3rd chapter, verses 8 through 10. It's titled, Do Not Rob God. Will anyone rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how are we robbing you? In your tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the full tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house, and thus put me to the test, says the Lord of hosts. See if I will not open the windows of heaven for you, and pour down for you an overflowing blessing.
Thank you, Karen, for sharing our scripture with us today. Have you noticed how many factories today have a big white banner prominently displaying how many days they have gone without any injuries? The reason for this is because any injury makes everyone pay a price. When you count the cost of treating the injury, replacing the worker, loss of productivity, higher workmen's comp rates, and higher health liability insurance rates, you can see why getting employees to follow the safety rules is so important. Too bad we don't count the number of people keeping God's rules in the church. When God's people keep the rules, then everyone benefits, just as when only one breaks the rules, everyone inevitably pays a price. Tithing is one of God's rules. Yes, we're going to talk about tithing today. Friends, tithing is not a test to see how much money the church can raise. Tithing is a test of faith to help us grow in our relationship with Christ. The reason I am speaking on tithing today is not because we necessarily need more money here at Faith. No, the reason I am talking about tithing is because it is a critical element of your relationship with God. Tithing is between you and God. It's not about our church. It's not about me. Just because 1 out of every 8 verses in the Bible talks about money actually is reason enough to talk about it more than a couple of Sundays per year. Would it be Christian of me to not talk about money when Jesus talked so much about it? Not only would it not be Christian of me, it wouldn't be pastoral either. Jesus is the one who established the truth about the link between a person's money and his or her heart. He said, "For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." What exactly is tithing? Tithing is bringing 10% of the increase of wealth to the Lord, to the church. Not United Way or any other of the agencies out there. The tithe, the full tithe, is to come to the church. Beyond that, we give gifts and we give offerings. Anytime you receive more wealth as in paychecks, sales of cashed out items, etc., you are increasing your wealth. God is asking for 10% of what that figure is. 10 pieces of candy, give back 1. Martin Luther said that a Christian must be converted 3 times. The first time for his mind, the second time for his heart, and the third time for his wallet. And of the 3, the most difficult conversion is of the wallet. Someone once said that a Christian is someone who is content to live on leftovers. We've all been eating a lot of leftovers, right? Since Thanksgiving. But we're content as Christians to live on leftovers. When it comes to tithing, isn't that basically true? We give to God the first of what comes in, and then we gladly live on what's left over. That's tithing. What's the origin of tithing? The idea of 10% probably had its origin with simple math. Since people have always had 10 fingers, figuring out how to compute 1 out of 10 would be fairly easy. The earliest biblical reference is 4,600 years ago, when Abram got through a war fairly unscathed and rescued his relative Lot. The Bible mentions that Abram then went to Melchizedek, a king and priest of God, and gave him a tenth of everything he owned. It says, "Blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." And Abram gave him 1/10 of everything. Another early place we see the tithe is in Numbers, chapter 18, verse 21, where Moses gives the people a law of God, telling them to bring all their tithes to the priests. It says, "To the Levites, I have given every tithe in Israel for possession in return for the service they perform, the service in the tent of meetings." In the New Testament, Jesus assumed the old law was the rock bottom expectation of the Christian. According to Jesus, his followers should not only give according to the law, but also a whole lot more. Doggone Jesus. A whole lot more. That was Jesus' message throughout the New Testament. Consider the Sermon on the Mount. In this teaching, Jesus magnifies rather than minimizes the expectations previously associated with the law of Moses. The expectations Jesus places on his followers, thanks to the introduction of grace that he brought, go above and beyond the expectations of the law that preceded him, the law of Moses. If anger in the Sermon on the Mount is now made level with murder, if lust is leveled with adultery, doesn't it stand to reason that the tithe is now considered a baseline command, a minimum expectation, now maximized through grace? Much to the contrary of the law being obsolete because of Jesus. I hear that a lot. The law, we don't have to follow that. That's obsolete because Jesus came. No. Giving under grace, giving under Jesus, implies we should all be giving even more sacrificially than those who gave under the law. We should be operating at a higher level than the threshold previously mandated. The early church in the East tithed from the inspiration of the story of the rich young ruler. In the Western church, Chrysostom shamed his church by marveling at the tithes of others. So tithing has been practiced by God's children for thousands of years. What's good about tithing? Anything? Anything good about it? Well, I believe there's many good things about tithing, but I want to just briefly mention 3. The first, tithing is evidence of a growing faith. Tithing and faith are intricately connected. It takes faith to tithe, especially to get started. Maybe you're on the path to make that next step toward tithing. It takes a lot of faith. When we tithe, we are stating that we are practicing faith, that God will do what God says He will do, regardless of how likely I am to see what God does. Second, tithing reminds me of God's ownership. In the great San Francisco earthquake a century or more ago, one of the complicating factors was that the ensuing fire destroyed nearly every document there was. As a result, people who had rented their houses told judges that they had owned them instead, and that the deeds had just been burned in the fire. Only the landlords who had rent receipts were able to retain ownership of their property. Friends, when we tithe, in essence, we are giving a receipt to God that we acknowledge that He is the owner of all things. It's our receipt. Third, the third thing that's good about tithing, tithing proves God can trust me with more. Get that. God can trust me with more because I tithe. One of the biblical reasons God gives us wealth is for us to share it with others. A 90% commission isn't bad for any job, is it? 90%, not too bad. But that is exactly what God does in giving us money, when it is His intention that we should pass it on to do His saving work in the world. Wouldn't it be sad to get to heaven and discover that the one reason you didn't have more wealth on earth, not just in money, but in skills, in love, in goodness, in employment, was because God couldn't rely on you to pass a tenth of it on to others? Wouldn't that be sad? Considering tithing, what's bad to do? I had a problem with my kids when they were young. If they needed $6, let's say, to pay a fee or something, I would usually be glad to help them out. If I didn't have 6 ones or a 5 and a 1, but had a 10, I would usually give them the 10 and ask them to bring me back the change. But I remember a time, probably more than one, when one of my kids brought me back $3 instead of 4. It created a real problem. The issue wasn't the amount, but the deal we had made together. Here's 10. Bring me back the change. I was told my kids that if they needed anything, like that extra $1, I would have been glad to give it to them if they asked. The problem wasn't that I needed the extra $1. It was that they withheld it from me without asking. You see, when God gives us X amount of money, God expects 1/10 of it to come back to Him regardless. Regardless. That's a tough one. Regardless. Regardless of our situation. That's the expectation. In John 12, there is a story of Mary, not Jesus' mother, but a Mary who went to a high-priced store and bought some expensive perfume, and she poured it on Jesus' feet. But Judas protested, saying the money should have not been spent on such a frivolous thing. It should have been put in the disciples' money bag and used to feed the poor. Of course, the only reason Judas threw in the bit about the poor was because that was his best chance of getting people to put money in the bag that he regularly embezzled from. So what Judas was really saying was, don't take that money away from me. I want that money. Let's exchange the biblical word for money bag to offering plate. When we don't give our tithe to the Lord, aren't we saying, I don't want this money to go to the Lord? I want this money from me. Malachi 3:8 warns us about stealing from God. It says, how do we rob God? We rob God when we don't return His money to Him. And now that you know, would you willingly rob God? Yes, these are hard words. They strike at the heart. They're hard words. For me too. Why should I tithe? In Luke 16:11, Jesus makes an amazing statement. If you cannot be trusted with worldly wealth, how can God trust you with true riches? Jesus makes it plain that there is a connection between how we spend our money on earth and how we will spend eternity. Wow! That's huge. That puts a whole different spin on spending, doesn't it? Personally, I would rather have 9 out of every $10 with God's blessing upon it than 10 out of every $10 without God's blessing. You know that without God's blessing, you would lose more than $1 anyways, don't you? Besides, tithing keeps me one step ahead of my own selfishness, my own greed, and believe me, it's there. It lurks in the darkness inside of me, for sure. There's only 2 times that the phrase floodgates of heaven, when Karen read it, it said windows of heaven. There's only 2 times that it's used. One is with Noah, when he built the ark. And the floodgates opened, and the deluge that flooded the globe happened and became the meaning of the floodgates of heaven. The second time it's used is in Malachi 3:10, in reference to blessings being poured out on tithers. Sometimes I don't feel like God has exactly opened the floodgates of heaven on me after years of tithing, but that might be a very narrow and blind view of life, I realize. Certainly in comparison to 95% of the world, I live in great wealth. Who knows what my life would be like without God's blessing? I shudder to think of what it would be like. Maybe you need to ask God to reveal how the floodgates can change your life, or how they have changed your life. Or maybe you need to start thinking of moving toward tithing, or jumping all the way there, so that you can experience the floodgates of heaven. Let's take this time to consider the brutal truth about ourselves before the Lord, and allow Him to reveal your next step. And so now, I'd like to talk to you briefly about 2 things. One is the tithing challenge. You maybe received it in the newsletter. Some of you are leaders, have received it in the mail, and now you're receiving it here. I'll be putting this in for a number of Sundays, encouraging more people as we go to consider this. If you haven't read this through yet, I ask you to do so, because it speaks in there at the very beginning about 3 steps. The first one is step 1, the senior pastor begins tithing. I tithe at both churches, and Mike does at his. Step 2, hold the leaders accountable. I've done that by mailing out a request to them to be the first to say yes to this 3-month tithe of trying it on, or at least trying on a step more than what you're doing for just 3 months. See how it feels. And step 3, challenge the attenders and the members. That's you. And that's what we're doing today. Friends, consider on the back, tithing challenge options. And you can put your option, if you so choose. This is between you and God. You can choose that on your Connect card. Either A, I will take the tithing challenge. Bam, I'm going to do it. B, we already tithe, but I'm willing to go beyond the tithe during this challenge and see what God has in store for me. That's the step I'm taking. I'm going to increase my tithe so that I can see what God has in store for me in the next 3 months. Or C, calculate what percentage you're currently giving. You know what you make, you know what you give. What percentage are you currently giving? And then challenge yourself to increase it by 1, 2, 3, whatever percent. So A, B, C, or not anything. It's up to you. This is just a tithing challenge for us to try it on. Maybe you've never done that. So let's give it a try. Also, I want to talk to you about the Financial Peace Growth Group. That is going to be starting in a couple of weeks. It's all about living with financial peace. If you're in debt, if you need help with budgeting, if you need help with college, tuition, buying cars, whatever it is, this class is phenomenal. It is being used far and wide, and it is something that has changed many people's lives. Even if you take it and take out a few nuggets from it to start using, it'll be well worth your time. So think about joining Financial Peace. We got a short little video to show you.
Financial Peace University began about 20 years ago, and now today we've had over 1.5 million families go through this course. This is the place where we start happening to our money, where we start aiming our dollars at our goals. You got to make your money behave. You work too hard to get to the end of your life and be broke. There's a massive group of people out there trying to sell you stuff. They want to interrupt your plans. Don't cash out your 401k. I know your 401k looks like a 201k. Remain calm. The only people that get hurt on a roller coaster are those that jump off. God's all in this thing. He's all about fixing you. He's all about fixing me. There's a redemption story built into this whole thing. And every time I give, every time I understand I'm not an owner, I move along that spectrum from selfish to selfless. Now this is a boot camp. I'm your coach. I've had some good coaches and they lift me up a time or two. They caused me to go places I couldn't go otherwise. You change your life when you get sick and tired of being sick and tired. Where you say, I've had it. This is how you get out of debt. You gotta run for your life. You gotta run. You gotta bust it. You gotta get out of your life and get started. What would happen to the kingdom of God if the people of God were out of debt? How much of this world could we as believers change?
So continue to think about that as we prepare now for our service of communion. If you would